You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Refreshing wild cherry cola meets smooth cream. The treat you deserve. Pepsi Wild Cherry and Cream. Treat yourself.
Best gift ever!
A Lego set is a gift that always clicks. And clicks.
Woo! Next level!
And clicks. For kids who love gaming, choose a Lego set. The gift that always clicks.
This episode is brought to you by our Patreon members. Thank you so much.
Join our Patreon for extra episodes, interviews, extra content, and to help support the podcast and help us continue to do the work we do.
Go to patreon.com/ancienthistoryfangirl to learn more.
God damn it, Medea! Just can't you tell he's being evil?
I'm Jenny Williamson.
And I'm Jen McMenemy.
And this is Ancient History Fangirl.
We are thrilled to welcome Rosie Hewlett to the podcast. Rosie is an international award-winning author. Her debut novel, Medea, was published in April 2021 and won the Rubery Book of the Year award. Her second novel, Medea, will be published by Transworld in March 2024. Welcome, Rosie, to the podcast.
Welcome. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
So, let's talk about our favorite bad girl of mythology, Medea. What drew you to Medea and made you want to tell her story?
Well, I feel like it's just Medea herself is just such a fascinating character. You can't help but be drawn to her. I remember when I studied her at school, I was lucky enough that my secondary school offered classics as a subject. And I remember reading Euripides' Medea in school, and I was just amazed by her. I think her speeches in that play are incredible. The stuff that she talks about, like the feminist angle, which she brings, is just amazing. And I remember from that point, I was just captivated by her as a character. And then I delved more into her myth and the story before that, before she gets to Corinth. And just everything she does is just incredible. Like, she's that kind of person where she's like, if she wants to do something, she'll go and she'll do it. And yeah, I just became really fascinated with her. And I thought it was interesting that of the myths that we have about her, they're sort of either at the beginning of her story or at the end of her story, but there's not one cohesive one that sort of links the two. And that's what I really wanted to do is write her story from the very beginning and follow it right through to that big ending that we all know, or most of us know. I've been saying to people, it's like fan fiction for me writing these books because I'm just a massive fan of Medea and these characters. So it really is just like fan fiction, getting to write her story and all the characters that come into it, like Atalanta and Circe. I had such a joy writing it, even though it's quite a dark story.
Don't worry, we're going to talk all about Atalanta and Circe because I was so excited to see, I'm a huge mythology nerd, as everyone knows. I feel every time I say that, I'm like, do I need to qualify that again? But yeah, so when I got to see them in this book, I was like, yes, give me all the details about them. So one of the interesting things that I found with your take on Medea is her relationship with her brother, Absyrtus. They have a very combative relationship, one that is made worse in the beginning after she turns him into a pig. This is at the very beginning, no spoilers. Also, this is thousands of years old, but anyway, no spoilers. So why did you choose to portray Absyrtus as kind of a key antagonist in your retelling?
It's an interesting one because there's two versions of Absyrtus in that can be portrayed as Medea's little brother in some myths, in very much the innocent. And then there's the other version, which is in Apollonius, where he's, a general in the army and he's a fully grown man. I always thought it was interesting to have that interplay between them, the kind of the hostility, because I think it helps explain why Medea wants to leave Colchis so badly. And that was one of the questions that I sat down with and had to think about a lot when I started this book is, why does Medea want to leave Colchis? What's driving her to be so desperate to get out of there? Because I think in the earlier myths about her, it's a lot about how she's struck by an arrow by Eros and she just falls in love with Jason, and she's so head over heels that she betrays her whole family and goes off with Jason. And I feel like that version of it takes out any of her agency, really, because it's just her being a pawn of the gods and being in love with Jason, which isn't even it's a feeling that's been given to her. So I really wanted to think about why does Medea want to leave Colchis, what's driving her out. And it's this idea of her as being a very isolated figure there, and her as her magic being seen as a negative thing. That's another thing that I wanted to twist around when I was looking at it, because obviously in the ancient versions, Colchis is being discussed as a land of magic, and like Medea's father is discussed as being a sorcerer king. People say that he has magic, but I thought it'd be interesting if what if her father is the same as Jason and he's actually got no power? He just uses Medea's magic, kind of uses it and disguises it as himself and uses it to feed his own legacy and his own like might. So I think it was that idea of Medea being isolated with her magic. If she's the only person who has magic in Colchis, and then what does that do to everyone around her? How does that, especially the men, how do they react when it's like there's a powerful woman and they're not okay with that? So I think you can very much see that in her father and her brother, and that kind of power imbalance that they try and push her down because they know she's more powerful than they will ever be and they don't like it. So so I think that's really where it stemmed from, is her relationship with her brother helped feed this course of Medea and why she wanted to leave Colchis and why she's so desperate to get out of there, because, her brother, like her father, are just horrible to her.
Her father is definitely trying to use her magic and sort of, appropriate it as his own, in a sense, right? So, like, in a sense, you can see why from the outside it looks like he's the sorcerer king, because he's essentially trying to use Medea as his own sort of weapon.
Exactly. And I think it's interesting how Aeetes, her dad, he's known as a sorcerer king, but there's not really any evidence of him doing any magic. So it's like, was he really a sorcerer king, or was he just using Medea's magic and being like, yeah, look, I'm really powerful, I'm doing this, it's all myself? Once I opened that door of, okay, well, what if Medea is actually the only one who can do magic? Then that opened all these other doors of her character in my head of like, well, would feel so isolated and she'd feel very other, even in her own homeland, and opened up that relationship with her and her father, which is very complex in that, he wants to use her power, but he also kind of hates her for it because he's jealous. Once I had those kind of threads, it all started to fall together for me in terms of how I wanted to approach my version of Medea.
So Medea is very isolated, as we've discussed, because of her magic. She also has a certain disdain for human life by turning her brother into a pig or a man into a dragon. Does her magic make her less human or more than human? And what does her contempt for others mean or tell us about her?
Ooh, that is a good question. I think what's interesting about Medea and her magic is that on the one hand, she's an incredibly powerful witch with all of this power and ability within her. But then she's also, on the same hand, she's just a young, naive girl who's very sheltered. And I think that interplay between power and naivety is something that I found really, really interesting when exploring her character, and how one informs the other, and how when they mix it can be very dangerous. And then also the element that comes in when you have someone like Jason who wants to, manipulate one thing to then weaponize the other thing. I think Medea is fascinating because the elements of her magic can make her she almost seems quite godlike in a way because of the things that she's able to do, and she's almost quite untouchable in a lot of the things she does. When people do bad things, they sort of have repercussions, but Medea is almost a little bit untouched, as if the gods are sort of scared of her. By the same token, it's also, she is still this quite a relatable young woman who just falls in love with the wrong person and puts her love and trust in that person and has it thrown back in her face. And I think that also makes her very relatable in a way. So I think it's that they sort of contradict each other, but they also play into each other. And I think that's what makes her so fascinating, is she is very human, but she's also very not human. And in terms of her respect for human life, I think it's an interesting question. And I think it's, when Medea is younger, it's almost like she doesn't really understand her power. So she sort of turns her brother into a pig because she's just a kid, and she's like, he's annoying me, so I'm going to turn him into a pig. And it's like, she doesn't really think about, well, that's not a very good thing to do.
No, or the psychological repercussions that might happen to a person who was turned into a pig. Yeah.
I think that's, again, the whole idea of she's so powerful, but she's also so naive. And I think having that much power in a child is dangerous. And then also when it's a child who's been grown up in an environment where she's been taught to kind of hate herself, then she turns that self-loathing on herself, but then also outwardly as well, which makes her a little bit more violent. And then I also think Medea in herself just has a dark streak in her. I just think she just does. And I think she's just quite cold in some ways. And so she's willing to do terrible things for what she thinks is right. And what she thinks is right isn't always right. Yeah, I just think she's such a fascinating character for so many reasons. That's why I love her.
kids, to a certain extent, need to be taught empathy. You're not necessarily born with it. I mean, some people are, but sometimes kids have to be taught how to empathize with others and how to think about how others feel about things. Like, that's part of teaching kids how to be in the world, you know? And like Medea reminds me of a child in that potentially she has not been taught that, especially when she's, you know, younger and turning her brother into a pig because annoying sibling. But like that streak stays with her as an adult, seems like. And I just love that characterization because in a way it struck me as very true to life.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's something that's kind of sad about Medea throughout, is that she has the capacity to be a good person. I think she's just been taught all the ways to be a bad person. And I think lots of people have almost pushed on her that you're a monster, you're weird, you're evil. And it's like, that's pushed her down a path that it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy that she eventually kind of becomes what everyone says she is. Whereas if she just had, you know, parents that were understanding of her abilities, or if Circe was able to stay in her life longer, I think she could have taken such a different road, which I think is what's so sad about her is she does have that capacity. She just maybe needed more of a helping hand, but then Jason came in and pretended to be that helping hand and then completely ruined it.
That's the thing, right? She's just so desperate in a lot of ways for someone to love and affirm her, and to, you know, one of the things that Jason is great at is he sees what her weakness is, which is her magic is not a curse, it's a gift. And he helps her to see this other side of her, this side that's desirable. And I think he's great at manipulating people. That's how he keeps his Argonauts together. You kind of have to feel a little bit of sympathy for Medea, because I do think, Jenny, you have a point there. I do think nobody teaches her empathy. They're so busy being afraid of her. They don't teach her what it's like to feel. You do have this great moment, Rosie, later in the book, where her mother says to her, you know, your brother still has nightmares about what you did to him. That's probably the first time she's thought about, like, oh, there's a psychological repercussion for turning my brother into a pig that he's still dealing with.
She has this moment where she's like, oh, maybe Aspertus is also a victim, but does not last very long.
Because he's still a jerk. Like, would he have been as big a jerk if she turned him into a pig or not? Debatable. It was really fascinating for me, particularly when we're building this complex image of Medea, to see, like, psychologically, she never really thought about the trauma she inflicted on others. It makes me think about also, like, minor spoiler, but there is a man who is transformed into a dragon. And you just get this feeling that she never really thought about the consequences of turning a human being into a dragon.
Yeah, I think there's definitely, like I said before, there is an element of darkness to Medea. Like in the very early on in the book, when she talks about she made her sister cry because she found a dead bird and she wanted to see what was inside. Like, there is definitely, she's drawn to darker things, and I think her emotions are a little bit different to everyone else's, and I think that's also what feeds into her being a bit other. It's her magic, but it's also just her as a person. I think she is a little bit different to everyone else. Like her sister Chalciope, who's quite soft and sweet and lovely, and Medea is just like nothing like that, and she feels very other. And yeah, I think when she turns these people into animals, it's sort of like she just thinks, well, I can, so I'm going to do it. And I think Medea has this issue of those that she feels loyal to, she will do anything for, and she will literally ruin herself to protect them. But everyone else is sort of, I suppose, disposable to her in a way. And that means that's obviously not a good thing. Interesting is Medea, she's not a good person, I wouldn't say. I think she's a very complicated person, and I think she had the capacity to be a good person. But I wouldn't say that she is a good person, but I also wouldn't say that she's an entirely bad person. I think she's just very complex, and she lives in that very grey area in the middle, which is what, again, makes her such an interesting character for a book.
I mean, it's where we all live, right? Like this idea of like good people and bad people. I mean, there are extremes, but like in a lot of cases, that's kind of a misnomer. Like we've all got our good and bad sides. Like we've all got our darknesses.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what I think's important to me with every character, really, is there's no character in the book that is a full villain. I mean, Jason is pretty bad, but I think every character in that book, if you were hearing it from their point of view, you could probably see them in a better light. Like, again, like her brother. Yes, he is a jerk throughout the book, but then also he has this childhood trauma that his sister turned him into a pig, which has probably been horrifically traumatizing. He's had to live with that his whole life, having nightmares and really suffering from it. And Medea's just been this kind of tormented figure in his head. And so I think you can see him in this other light where it's actually he's not evil, he's just traumatized. So that's what I think fascinates me with any character, is the good and the bad and the gray area, and where do they exist within it.
And he's also grown up in the same toxic stew of masculinity and everything else that is, the court of Colchis, right? He has the same expectations or slightly different expectations on him from his father, who's not a great guy. There's a lot that you can see in him as a character where you're like, oh, you've built this complicated dude. And I think that's a really great sign of the book and you as a writer that we can see him in a few different ways, even if he is the antagonist.
Yeah, and I think his relationship with the dad's interesting as well because, his father is also Medea's father, we know is not a great guy either. There's a bit when Medea kind of thinks like she suddenly wonders, oh, did you have a bad relationship with our dad too? Like she doesn't actually know. And so it could be that he was also abused by Aeetes. She just doesn't know that. And she's not really stopped to think about it, which is, again, maybe Medea being wrapped up in her own world a little bit. And also because her and her brother have been so against each other, they've sort of only ever seen each other as enemies. So she's never been able to sort of see him as someone who's suffered similarly to her by the hands of their father. So that's definitely as a writer, what excites me is the grey area with every character and where you want to sit in there and how you explore that.
Did you know only 6% of people are getting enough fiber? That's why Quaker created Fiber February, a month-long movement to show your gut a little more love. It's like dry January, only easier and more delicious. Quaker has over 100 delicious options that are a good source of fiber. So go buy Quaker Oats today and join the Fiber February movement for a healthy gut.
Raise the rudders! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. Start converting your B2B audience today. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a free $250 credit for the next one. Get started today at linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
Zootopia 2 has come home to Disney+.
Let's go!
Get ready for a new case.
We're the greatest partners of all time!
New friends.
Gary the Snake. And your last name? The Snake.
Dream Team. Get new habitats.
Zootopia has a secret reptile population.
You can watch the record-breaking phenomenon at home. Zootopia 2, now available on Disney+, rated PG. And right now you can get Disney Plus and Hulu for just $4.99 a month for 3 months with a special limited time offer. Ends March 24th. After 3 months, plan auto renews at $12.99 a month. Terms apply.
Let's talk about Circe a little bit. Circe appears in your novel and has a profound effect on her niece, Medea. What was it like envisioning your version of Circe and how her magic works? And that's actually a really good question, too, is how the magic system works.
Talking about it being like fan fiction, I was so excited to be able to write about her because I love Circe. She was such a cool character. And honestly, in my head, I felt like Circe was just so clear in my head, just as this kind of quite cool, quite powerful, that kind of, I just had this really strong idea of her. So her voice came very clearly to me, I think, quite early on. Circe's just she's such a cool character, and the impact she has on Medea's life is obviously really important. But then she gets taken away from Medea a bit too soon. And that absence as well is really impactful on Medea's life. And actually, the scene between Medea and Circe on Aiaia, that conversation they have was one of my favorite scenes to write, because I think they're just both such fascinating women in their own ways. And getting to write that kind of in-depth conversation between them about their power and their relationship was just, I loved writing that scene. In terms of the magic, the magic was an interesting one, because it's a bit of a grey area in the ancient world. There's not really a clear system of how it works. And there's also, it's a bit of a mixture as well, because it blends with their religion quite a lot as well. So it's, in terms of how magic works, when you're sort of mixing things together and maybe sacrificing something and asking Hecate for aid, that's sort of the same thing as when people did sacrifices to the gods, just in a religious sense. So there is definitely a blurred grey area. So what I needed to do when I was writing this book is to really figure out how I wanted the magic system to work in my version of the story. And that's what led me to there's the earth magic, which kind of leads into that pharmakeia element, which is, getting herbs and plants and things from the earth and using that magic and mixing it with your own innate magic. But then there was also the darker magic, which I wanted to explore. I mean, in Apollonius's Argonautica, I noticed there's a real jump. Medea sort of starts off just creating, like little spells in terms of medicinal spells and that kind of thing. And then later on in the book, she's suddenly summoning death spirits from the underworld and unleashing them on giants. And it's kind of like, well, how did you that's a bit of a jump to go from like, doesn't really explain it. She's just sort of like, oh, don't worry, I can do this. And she just summons demons from the underworld. And you're just thinking, have you always been able to do that?
It seems like two different skill sets, right?
Yeah, it feels like it's a bit of a jump. So when I was writing the book, I needed to think about, well, how does she do that jump? And why does she do that jump? And where does that come from? And then that opened the door of, well, what changes in Medea's life between those 2 points? And it's, well, spoilers, but it's, she does something bad. I thought if that opens the door to that kind of magic. And then actually in the Argonautica, when Medea does summon demons from the underworld, there's a line in it that says, it's something like, she shaped her soul to mischief, and that's how she summoned them. And I thought that idea of shaping your soul was really interesting. And that wording, and that's what led me to then go down the rabbit hole of well, what if this dark magic does change her and does shape her soul and sort of affect who she is and affect what she becomes? And that kind of explains that sort of descent that she has into the person that she becomes at the end of the book. So yeah, that was kind of where it all came about.
It's super interesting because it feels like two different magic systems in two different books. And I thought it was cool how you combine them like that and like use the ancient sources as a basis.
Yeah, no, it was definitely, it was one that I really wanted to make sure I got right, because I think if the magic didn't feel tangible, it would just sort of fall a bit flat. So I really wanted to make sure that it all felt kind of real within that world, and it all made sense within that world. I mean, there's a lot of the magic in the sources as well. It's really interesting. Like in Ovid's Metamorphosis, he talks a lot about the potions she makes, and again in the Argonautica, he talks quite specifically about the potion she makes, the fire repellent potion, and the plants she uses for that. So there was a lot to draw from, but it was just figuring out how the kind of the laws of it worked and how it worked with Hecate's involvement, and then Medea's own innate magic, and how it all kind of linked together was something that I needed to just figure out.
Let's talk about Aeetes for a second. Medea's father, King Aeetes, he both fears his daughter's magic and desperately wants to control her, as we've talked about before. What was it like creating this character, and what sources did you draw from? And why'd you choose to depict him in the way that you did?
So this kind of links to what I was saying earlier about wanting to understand why Medea wants to leave Colchis so badly. And I think when I sat down to start planning and writing the book, I had that question of, well, why does she want to leave? And I knew from the outset I didn't want it to be just that she's struck by Eros's arrow of love and then she goes off on this adventure, because I just don't think that gives her any agency. And there's, in the Argonautica again, there's talk quite early on when Aeetes comes in, and it says something about his wrath, his boiling wrath, and he basically throws a hissy fit really quickly at Jason when he arrives. And I just thought, well, okay, so what if Aeetes is this very short-tempered king who's actually quite nasty, and how would that be for Medea growing up with him, and how would she navigate that? And then when I got thinking about Aeetes as being a king without magic and that relationship with Medea, that really opened up so many doors of understanding who Medea was as a character. And I think when I got Aeetes in my head and how I wanted to portray him, that really helped me understand Medea and how I wanted to portray my Medea, and that kind of power dynamic between them of him desperately wanting to be in control but knowing Medea is way more powerful than him, and also his relationship with Circe, having such a powerful sister and he's just got nothing, and he's the son of a god but he's got nothing to show for it, and that bitterness inside him because of that.
What do we know about him from the ancient sources, aside from the Sorcerer King and his lineage? Is there a lot to draw from?
There's not loads, and I think that's what's interesting is why it kind of felt like there was this gap to fill with him being not that powerful. Because I mean, he's in the Argonautica, but again, it's like he's not there wielding magic like Medea is. He's not summoning death spirits and all the rest of it. So he does appear in the ancient sources, but he's not in it loads. There's some about his earlier life with his brothers and sort of what lands they take over and how he kind of gets to Colchis, but there's not that much on him. So I felt like it gave me the room to explore my version of him and how I wanted to shape him as this sort of a bit of a lie, really. So it's almost like what we know about him isn't even true. He's just pretended to be a sorcerer king to kind of inflate his own legacy.
It's interesting when you talk about, Circe as his sister. I also always think of Pasiphae as his sister, and she's another infamous woman with a little bit of magic who gets herself into quite the predicament, being the mother of the Minotaur. Yeah, I think it's interesting to look at his legacy as being like, well, he doesn't actually have that power. That power went to the women in his family. Who does that make him and his brothers by extension?
The seething resentment of a man who got passed by with power that went to the women in his family. Gosh.
Yeah, exactly. And I think he just can't stand that, to have the powerful women. Yeah, in that kind of that family, it's the women who are most remembered and most interesting, and the men are kind of slightly forgotten, and there's not that much on them. I-80's just, he cannot stand that.
So this is no surprise to any of our listeners, one of my favorite characters in all of Greek mythology is Atalanta. And she appears in your novel, which made me very happy because sometimes people don't put her in the Argo, in the quest for the Golden Fleece. So Atalanta is a woman with a lot of agency, which women in your version of Colchis didn't have. She also has a lot of physical power. How did writing her differ from writing Medea, who has a lot of magic and more internal power? And what was it like writing two very different and very powerful women?
It was awesome getting to Atalanta. She's, again, one of my favorite characters. And it's such an injustice that we don't really have anything surviving on Atalanta and Medea crossing paths, because they would have crossed paths on the Argo, but there's nothing to show for it, nothing about these two really powerful women crossing over and how they would have reacted to each other and how they would have thought of each other. And I just think it's always such a shame that we never knew anything about that. One of the things I was actually most excited about writing this book was that relationship between her and Atalanta and how that would play out. And I think it is really interesting about their different kinds of power, because they are both incredibly powerful, but in different ways. And I think what we see in Atalanta is she's a woman who is very sure of herself and sure of who she is. And she's not ashamed of who she is. Whereas Medea is someone who's been brought up to be, though she wouldn't really admit it, she is ashamed of her power because she's been made to feel that way. And she's not sure of who she is. She doesn't really know where she fits in the world or who she wants to be. We can see that when they interact, and Atalanta's confidence. And in a way, I think she recognizes in Medea maybe what she's gone through in her life, and that she's maybe had times where she's struggled with who she is, and she's come through that. And she sort of wants to guide Medea on the right path. And we can see Atalanta kind of offering that hand of friendship to Medea multiple times. And sadly, Medea, there's points where you think she might take it, but then she's too far down this path with Jason that she's kind of blinded to that, which I think is such a tragic moment in the book when she sort of turns herself away from Atalanta. But yeah, I think seeing both of them and both their power and the interplay of that was, I love. I'm a massive Atalanta fangirl, so I just wanted to put her in the book, and I loved writing her.
It's always fun showing different types of feminine power in the ancient world too, because there are lots of cultures that did not allow women a lot of power. So there's differences between women who have overt and kind of covert power. And I always love that interaction, like between women who hold different kinds of power.
Yes, exactly. And also just interactions between women in general. I think that's something that really fascinates me in the ancient world, and we don't always get a lot of, because obviously all of these myths were written by men for men, a lot of them to be performed by men dressed as women. So they obviously left out a lot of female friendships. And I just think it's something that's really, really interests me. And that's why in my book, there's a lot of times I've put in Medea crossing paths with other women, because I really wanted to explore that and explore, I think, the women in your life are so important as a woman, kind of who you become. And I think that's what I really wanted to show was Medea crossing paths with all these really interesting women, and why I sort of engineered some of the scenes where she meets women that you don't see in the original myth, like when she meets Glauce and those kinds of things. I really wanted to show her crossing paths with these women, and that interaction, I think, fascinates me.
Pele, Hawaiian goddess of volcanoes, fire, and rebirth.
Maeve, Celtic warrior queen and nemesis of heroes.
Kiyohime, Japanese fire-breathing snake demon.
Pesta, Norwegian spirit of the Black Death. Our book, Women of Myth, is a fascinating look at women and femme characters in world mythology, including goddesses, heroines, and monsters. With captivating illustrations by Ringo Award-nominated artist Sarah Richard, it's the perfect gift for the mythology lover in your life, including yourself.
Find Women of Myth wherever books are sold.
This episode is brought to you by Beneful. Dogs of the world, lend me your ears, snoots, and little toe beans. We've been sitting and staying for boring food for too long. It's time to demand high-quality ingredients, fresh fresh from the pantry. Together with Beneful freshly prepared meals, we can start a mealtime revolution. Can I get a woof woof? Kick boring in the bowl with Beneful freshly prepared meals. Visit Purina.com/Beneful to shop now.
At IKEA, your dreams can come true. Well, maybe not the ones where you're being chased by a monster. We're talking about kitchen dreams. And there are IKEA products and solutions for all of them. Whether it's a whole new kitchen, a statement glassware set, or just new cutlery. If you got big dreams or small dreams in any size or budget, IKEA can help you bring them to life. Visit IKEA.us/dreamkitchen to learn more. Dream the possibility.
We've had a couple of people who have written about the crew of the Argo, and I just wanted to ask you, did you have any surprises when you were writing about, as our listeners probably know, the crew of the Argo is kind of the who's who of Greek mythology. It's Orpheus and Heracles and Atalanta and Meleager and Peleus, the father of Achilles. Did you have any issues with writing these big characters, and who were you most excited to write about or most anxious about writing about?
I think the difficulty was with the Argo is that, there's so many big names, there's so many interesting characters that it's almost like it was tricky to know where to draw the line of overwhelming the reader, because I think it would be so easy to try and bring them all in and try and give them all a little moment. And I think in points I did try and do that. And then I was sort of in my editing stage, I was thinking it's too much. It sort of dilutes Medea's story if you start bringing in all these big characters. So it was trying to find that balance of, I suppose, picking characters that helped Medea's story, picking characters that sort of showed us a bit more about Jason and maybe his interactions with the people. But there are so many of the Argonauts that I could have delved into. And I chose, Atalanta because she's awesome. And I think her relationship with Medea is really important. And then Meleager, again, I think his relationship with Atalanta is interesting. And the way he treats Medea is interesting as well, in that he's not scared of her. And I think he's one of the first people that sort of treats her normally. And Medea's a bit like, oh, okay, which is a big part for her, I think. And then I think Orpheus I just think he's quite a fascinating character. And again, he's quite interested in Medea, and his sort of relationship with Jason's interesting as well, that they're old friends. So yeah, it was definitely challenging to try and think about who I wanted to bring in and why. I had to be, when I wrote my first draft, I was massively over the word count it was supposed to be. So I had to do a lot of cutting. I think if I'd had unlimited word count, I would have definitely dived into more of the Argonauts. But alas, I had to be a little bit cherry picking who I kind of showed and why.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about Orpheus, because I would say Orpheus's power, right? He has his own magical abilities with his lyre and his singing. It mirrors some of the stuff that Medea can do, but it's also different, obviously, as opposed to like the brawny might of Heracles or Atalanta or someone like that. So they are quite interesting mirrors for each other. As everyone knows, I have strong feels about how Orpheus returns from the underworld and his behavior later on. But, he also takes a dark turn in the mythology.
Yeah, I think Orpheus is, again, he's such an interesting character, and we only see like a little glimmer of him in Medea. And I think that's something that I also am quite keen on doing when I write these books is introducing these characters that people kind of go, oh, I want to learn more about them. And then people will go and study more of the myth and learn more about it. And I think Orpheus is definitely one of those characters that he appears in this book, and there is that kind of magical element to his abilities, and you kind of think, where does that come from, and where does he end up after he leaves Medea? Because he goes off with Atalanta and Meleager, and you think, well, where do they go? I want to follow their story, and that's my hope, is that readers who don't know the myth will go and then learn more about it, and it opens all those doors of the ancient world, which is exactly what I hoped the book will achieve.
I think it's maybe time to address the Jason in the room. I loved how you kind of like turned their relationship. And I'm a romance writer. My debut is coming out with Harlequin next year. And so I'm always like kind of primed when I see like really intense attraction between two characters that feels like love to me in literature. Obviously, in real life, it does to many of us. So when Medea first meets Jason, she feels an immediate attraction to him. And of course, he tells her all the right things and makes her feel seen in a way that nobody else has ever seen her in her life. What was it like writing about their romance? And my question is, as an author, did you have to start off by rooting for them in order to write it this way?
Yeah, it was hard. There were definitely points where I felt like I was writing and I was like, God damn it, Medea, just can't you tell he's being evil? But it's all part of her course that she takes. And I think we have to remember as well that Medea I think she's 17 when this all goes down. So she's a teenager. And if we think back when we were teenagers and a guy comes in and he says all the right things and you just get swept off your feet. And I think we've all been there where we've either been the friend or had a friend. And it's so obvious what they're doing, but you can't tell them because they're just blinded by their feelings and they're just swept up in it. And you've just got to let them kind of do the course and figure it out for themselves. And I think that's definitely how it felt writing Medea's story, is like, just had to let her go through it and experience it. And in terms of Jason's character, again, there is a lot of relatable elements, sadly, to the way he manipulates her. I think a lot of people have been in relationships where they have had that person who said all the right things, and that kind of the gaslighting, I think, is something that a lot of people have experienced. That whole element of their relationship just felt very, just so relatable. And I think that's what kind of helped me when writing it is that relatability of their love story. And I think a lot of us have gone through that kind of experience with someone. But it was hard to write Jason as a love interest because I hate him so much. Actually, my agent, one of her early edit notes she was like, you need to make Jason a little bit more likable at the start because he's so obviously a dick from the get-go. So I actually, on our edits, I had to go back and make him less of a jerk at the beginning, but I still think you can probably tell a little bit that from the start that I still don't like him.
You kind of have to get the audience to fall for him along with Medea in order to understand her actions, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that was my agent's her note was like, the audience need to fall in love with Jason too, so they can understand why Medea is falling for him, and they need to like be on board with it. And then there's the twist that they start to see, oh, hold on a sec. And actually one of my friends I gave her one of my early copies I've got, and she knows nothing about the myth at all, doesn't know where it goes or what happens. And she texts me being like, oh my God, I love Jason. I'm like, oh, great, okay.
My mom doesn't know the myth either, so I'm excited to see what happens when she reads it. I think it's one of those, Medea, the myth of Medea is one of those myths that either like I took my husband to go see a production of Medea a few years ago, and he did not know the ending of Medea, and I knew. So we're starting to get to the end, and I'm not going to spoil it, but Medea does something really unforgivable in a lot of ways at the end. And when you get there, you would see the people in the audience. It was very much like the Game of Thrones red wedding scene, where like half of us knew it was going to happen, and we were just watching the people around us to see how they were going to react. And it really is intense. You can hear a pin drop when you get there. To have that reaction of, a thousands and thousands year old play in the modern day at a modern theater in London was just incredible. My feelings on Jason are, he is the second worst in mythology. Theseus is 100% the worst, but it's real. There's not a lot between the two of them. I just can't. I think it was really clever to make his control over Medea really gaslighting and coercive control as opposed to her father's control over her. Like, you just look at two different ways that women can be manipulated. Some are more overt and then some are more covert.
Yes, exactly. And I also think it's that whole idea of that emotional abuse is still abuse. Like, Jason never really lays a hand on Medea, but he still is abusive to her. And I think that's quite an important thing as well, is that element of emotional abuse, and how Medea doesn't really see it at the start, but then it slowly begins to sort of make sense in her mind. And this great grand love story that she's built in her head is she's just suddenly realizes, wait a sec, this isn't what I thought it would be. You aren't who I thought you would be. And I think as well, when readers are reading it, you can sort of see it before Medea does, that what he's doing. And I think that's also just another thing for me, is like, I feel like if you can see it in the book and see it happening, then maybe in people's own lives, they'll be able to sort of see the signs and the red flags as well. And I think that's important to me as well, in that kind of discussion around coercive control and emotionally abusive relationships. I think it's all such important things, and it's amazing as well that this is a story from so long ago, but so much of it is still so relatable and applicable to today, which is just it's just incredible, really.
Without getting into too many spoilers, what was your favorite part of the myth that you got to retell? And what were you the most anxious about tackling? And what surprised you the most about the story? It is a 3-part question.
What I loved writing the most, I think it was Medea's relationship with the women in her story. I really loved that. So yeah, Atalanta, Circe especially, also her sister Cassiope, I thought their relationship was important. And I really loved exploring that, and their interactions were just a joy to write. in terms of what I was most worried to approach, not worried, but I think the ending was always something that I was just wondering how I would go about it. But when I write my books, I don't actually know how I'm going to finish them, because I think that's the liberty you can take with a Greek myth, is I know how it ends or how the different endings are in the ancient sources. So that's in my head, but I don't really know how I want to end it until I've gone on that journey with the characters, and until I kind of see what Medea's been through and how she's kind of changed and reacted from all of that. And we've been on this journey together. And then at the end, I'm like, okay, no, it makes sense that you would do this like this. Because of course her ending is very well known from Euripides' play, what she does, the very bad thing that she does. And I always knew that I didn't want to shy away. I never wanted to sanitize Medea's character in any way. I didn't want to shy away from the bad things that she does, because I don't believe in feeling like you have to like sanitize a woman to make her more, palatable in fiction. I just don't believe in that. But I did want to explore it in a different way. And when I got to that point in the book, I think it became quite evident to me that the way it unfolds in Euripides' play, I wanted to slightly do a little twist on that. So it still sort of follows that arc, but there's a newer twist and a newer element to it that felt very true to my Medea and the journey that she'd been on. And what was the third thing? I've forgotten.
What surprised you the most about the story?
Surprising the most, I think the way the magic worked, and how that, I think when I started writing it, I didn't think about the darker side of the magic. That was something that was kind of like as I was writing it. And then I got to the point where, in the Argonautica, Medea summons the death spirits. And I kind of thought, like, this is a bit weird that she's just suddenly doing this. And why is that suddenly a thing? And then then I started thinking about the darker side of the magic and how that might affect her, and how that was triggered, and how it kind of changes her. And so that was something that I sort of retrospectively, once I got to that point in the book, I suddenly thought, actually, this makes way more sense now. And so that kind of surprised me, but then helped really shape the book and shape Medea's character and her character arc as well.
AI is incredible. It can teach you how to fry an egg and even write a poem, pirate style. Yarr! But it knows nothing about your work. Slackbot is different. It doesn't just know the facts. It knows your schedule. It can turn a brainstorm into a brief. And it doesn't need to be taught. Because Slackbot isn't just another AI. It's AI that knows your work as well as you do. Visit slack.com/meet Slackbot to learn more.
Starting a business can seem like a daunting task, unless you have a partner like Shopify. They have the tools you need to start and grow your business. From designing a website to marketing to selling and beyond, Shopify can help with everything you need. There's a reason millions of companies like Mattel, Heinz, and Allbirds continue to trust and use them. With Shopify on your side, turn your big business idea into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
Experience a membership that backs what you're building with American Express Business Platinum. Get 2 times membership rewards points per dollar on eligible purchases in key business categories, as well as on each eligible purchase of $5,000 or more. On up to $2 million in eligible purchases per calendar year. American Express Business Platinum. There's nothing like it. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-platinum.
Colchis and Greece, the places in Greece that Medea goes, are very different. What historical research did you use to create these 2 different cultures?
So Colchis, well, I thought it was interesting to explore. When I talk about it, I'd like to pull from, there's kind of what Colchis is, and then there's the what people, their perception of Colchis is. So like when Atalanta turns up there, one of their first conversations, Atalanta makes a comment like, oh, there's no dead bodies hanging from the trees. And that's something that's in the Argonautica, is they say, oh, Colchis is a land where they hang their dead from the trees. So it's pulling from the ancient sources that said stuff as fact, and it's kind of showing how that kind of becomes gossip and becomes something that is then believed. And I think what was interesting for me is showing that Colchis wasn't actually that different from Greece. I think when Medea goes to Iolcus, she notices that there's not that huge of a difference between their cultures, but because of this idea of Colchis being beyond the ocean and far away, distant land of magic, there is that view from the Greeks that it's like very other, and they're barbarians and they're savage. it's bringing out that element of ignorance to Medea and to how they view Medea as a foreigner, which is obviously another key part of her story when she goes to Greece, is being treated as another and a foreigner, as well as being a witch. But yeah, I think it's really interesting being able to play around with the ancient sources and being able to see how the ancients viewed Colchis and play around with those elements and what you wanted to take as true and then what you wanted to kind of play with as sort of hearsay, I suppose, and showing the Greek view of them.
Medea's fortune is always tied to men. Like she's under her father's control, and the only way to get out is to marry someone. And this is initially until she meets Jason. I think before then she tries to get someone else to marry her so she can get out. It's just like her escape is another man. And we all know how the story concludes. It always struck me as a case study in what happens, what women can be driven to when they're backed into a corner by men and left with no other options.
The exploration of Medea in the ancient world is fascinating because she is quite a feminist icon in a way, and especially in Euripides' Medea. The stuff that she talks about is so forward thinking in her big famous speech to the women of Corinth, when she talks about the inequalities between men and women and talks about that injustice. And she has that famous line about, I'd rather go to battle 3 times over than give birth once. All of this stuff is it's incredibly feminist in the way that it's being portrayed, but then it's being written by a man in a very patriarchal society that's going to be performed by a man to an audience of men. So I think that has always really fascinated me. And how Medea's voice has survived as such a feminist voice as well. Like we can see in history, the suffragette movement, there was a popularity in the performances of Medea. Then again in the 70s, when the feminist movement, there was a massive spike in popularity of Euripides' Medea being performed. So she's a character that really speaks to feminism today. And I think, like you're saying, it's that idea of a woman being backed into a corner and sort of all the elements that women kind of can relate to of being, abused and neglected and undermined. So it's fascinating to me that it's very feminist figure has been born from a very sexist society, and the different ways they tell her story is she's still always very powerful, such a fascinating, complex figure. So I think that's always been really interesting to me, and especially my exploration of her and how she kind of is portrayed.
Absolutely. And just the idea that, in her time when this was written, this was a male playwright, male actors playing her to an audience of probably men, like just how male-centric all of this is, and yet this feminist voice emerges from that still speaks to us now. That's incredible.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, and I always wonder, what did they think when they were seeing this play? And it was just, the speech about how rubbish men are and how women are sidelined. And when it was first performed at the Dionysia Festival, in the competition, the play came 3rd, but that was out of 3 plays. So it technically came last. Is that because they were offended by Medea calling them all out, or was that just because the competition that year was so good? It's so much to think about. I love thinking about that stuff.
I mean, one of the things I love about Euripides is he's just such a shit stirrer. He's got the Trojan women as well, where it's just calling out the atrocities of men in war. And he kind of doesn't care. And I really love it. And I love that in his telling of Medea. He doesn't care. He doesn't care if he comes last or whatever. He's going to tell the story exactly the way he wants to. You can imagine that audience of mostly men watching this show and being called out and feeling deeply uncomfortable about sort of the female rage that may be hiding behind their wives' smiles. And I just think it's absolutely brilliant and sort of their own psychological torture.
Yeah, you could imagine them going home, looking at their wives like, are you going to kill my kids?
And my future wife, and wreck my life because I make poor decisions all the time and have been emotionally manipulating you, maybe?
Probably in the ancient world, being physically abusive with a woman was seen as the only kind of abuse, right? Like the idea of Jason being an abusive husband might not occur to men. They might sympathize with him and be like, well, yeah, obviously he needs to take another wife. Like the idea of being accountable to their wives for decisions that they make might be a foreign concept to them.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's, again, what's interesting in Euripides' Medea is the chorus of Corinthian women, they side with Medea and they're all like, yeah, what Jason's doing is awful. So it's such a fascinating play. You can study it endlessly, I think, from all the elements that it brings into it. And there's a lot of it that kind of reflects the political landscape of the time, and then also lots of stuff that, speaks to today. It's just an incredible play, really.
You all know how much I love mythology, and I was so excited for this book. And I just think it adds so much to the canon of retellings that are out there. And it's such a deeply fascinating look at Medea and all the characters who come into her orbit. Rosie, can you tell us a little bit about what you're working on next?
I am working on book 3, but it's not been announced yet. But I'm hoping I can announce it soon. But again, it's another Greek myth retelling. But it's a slightly different vibe to Medea. But very excited to announce it soon, hopefully.
Rosie, where can people find you on social media?
You can find me on Instagram, which is rosiehewlett.author, and you can find me on TikTok, which I think it's rosiehewlett.author. It's Rosie Hewlett author something. And I've also got Twitter, but I rarely post on there. So Instagram and TikTok are the places where I post most of my updates.
We've been hearing that a lot. We used to have, our biggest platform used to be Twitter, and we've been moving off of it, shall we say.
Yeah, I refuse to call it that other name. That doesn't exist.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been fascinating. Rosie's book, Medea, is excellent, highly recommended. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next week. Are we still doing it next week? We'll see you when we see you next. We're changing up our schedule. Anyway, thank you all so much for listening.
Grown-ups, if there's a child in your life who is interested in, curious about, or fascinated by people and places from history, then my podcast, The Past and the Curious, might just be a hit in your home. From the invention of microscopes to world-traveling dogs to fashions of the 1890s, gold rush ghost towns, and audiences going wild for walking competitions, we've got a little bit of it all. Hosted by children's author and museum educator Mick Sullivan, that's me. The show is fun, funny, engaging, honest, and beloved by kids and parents alike. Find The Past and the Curious at all the usual podcast places.